What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This is episode number 315. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line from, I'm assuming, snowy Denver, Luis Scott-Vargas.
If the half an hour of shoveling snow every morning has been any indication, yes, there's snow here.
Wait a minute. We talked about that before, but I didn't realize you'd have to do it again.
Well, yes, it's every time you snow. It
snows. No. That sounds awful. I just grilled carne asada outside.
Yeah, I could do that too. I would just have to be like wearing, boots and a jacket.
And I don't want to oversell it. It's 37 degrees and raining, so it wasn't the most pleasant experience. But I'll tell you what, the carne asada was the most pleasant experience. Right, so we're going to do something that we haven't really done before on the show. We're going to do kind of a year in review. We're going to look back at a bunch of the Magic happenings, specifically the sets and stuff that came out, and kind of look back at those from a limited standpoint and give some thoughts and stuff now that we've had some distance from them. And we're also going to look back at the year for the podcast for Limited Resources, and we've gotten a bunch of feedback from you, the listeners, primarily through the Reddit, the subreddit, the LRcast subreddit, which has been great. I love that. Every time we ask for feedback on there, we always get really well thought out, awesome stuff. And this one was no exception. So we're going to go over some of the I went through and read the whole thing and then kind of pulled out some of the stuff that stuck out to me as things that came up over and over. And we're going to talk about, the direction of the show and that kind of stuff as far as content goes. Before we get into all of that, we've got a few things to take care of here. First and foremost, Limited Resources is brought to you by, that's right, channelfireball.com. They are the place to go if you need to pick up anything Magic related, including single, sealed product. If you need some supplies, you can get them, some sleeves, that kind of stuff. You can get Limited Resources t-shirts. You can get Channel Fireball t-shirts there if you're, want to kind of let your value flag fly. There's also gpoakland.com. If you're planning on attending the event, you're going to want to get on that website and make sure that you get pre-registered and get any information that you need about travel or a lot of the events and artists and everything that's going to be going on at the GP early next year. That one's on January 9th. I'm going to be down there. Luis is going to be there. And it should be an awesome GP. I love the first GP of the year, as it's usually been a pretty extended break for most people. And, you can get a little jaded out on the old GP circuit for the people that fly to all of them. The travel starts to add up. Like going to one GP is super fun, but, going to your fifth one over the course of, a month and a half or whatever, it can start to feel like a bit of a grind. But I'll tell you what, you get people off the road for a few weeks like that and home with their families. And by the time January rolls around, they're raring to go and everybody's excited to get back out and play a GP. And so, yeah, if you want to join us, gpoakland.com is where you want to go. Of course, the show is also brought to you by you, the supporters, through Patreon. Thank you so much for your support. It is much appreciated. And, we'd like to try to give back in really any way we can. One of the ways that we've been able to do that recently is I got a stack of Delver playmats from our friends at Channel Fireball and Cascade Games after the GP in Seattle. And I think this is the last one to give away. I'll check. I might have another. But this is definitely one that we're giving away this week. And this week, it's going to go to Alex Ledger. So Alex, thank you so much for being a patron. And if you want to get in on one of these drawings, all you have to do is go to patreon.com/limitedresources, sign up. You can sign up for any amount. It doesn't matter. And your name will be automatically entered into these drawings. And, I do a bunch of these. I really try to give back. I've got another thing that I'll mention a little bit more next week, but I've got a bunch of cool Channel Fireball swag. I've also got Limited Resources t-shirts, and this stuff was given by CFB to you, the listeners, and we're going to give it away. So I've got some sleeves, some deck boxes and stuff from CFB that we get to give away. So that's exciting. We'll start doing that probably next week. One of the other perks to being a patron is that you get to submit questions for the Patreon question of the week. And we've got one here from Mark, who says, after listening to the recent episode on signals, I'd like to ask, how specific is your picture of what your neighbors are drafting and at which stage in the draft? I could say by the end of pack 1, for example, red is being totally cut off, white is pretty open, the rest are medium. But I've had my neighbor say to me at the end of a draft, I thought you must be in green-black. and I never reach that level of detail even by the end. How specific can your signal reading get? And you do hear that stuff, Luis, right? Like you always hear that all the time.
But when someone says that, most of the time they're just completely they're just guessing. I mean,
that's it. They're giving a guess that's their best guess. It's so funny.
And they're not guessing off zero information.
No.
People are like, you got to be red-black, right? It's like, dude, I'm blue-green. Like,
yeah. Yeah. Okay. And a lot of times they'll hit one of your colors, but even if they were guessing randomly 2 of the 5 colors, they're likely to hit one of your 2 colors. So yeah, it's not super impressive just to hit one out of the 2.
Well, realistically, if you can predict one of the 2 colors the person to your right is drafting, you're doing reasonably well. It's because most decks aren't 50-50 straight down the middle, red-white. Most decks, just the odds are one color is going to be heavier than the other, and in a lot of cases it's going to be quite a bit heavier. So it's easier and more useful to identify the color that they're taking more strongly. So when you're passing to me, and let's say at the end of the draft you have something like 15 red cards and 9 white cards, which is again a very normal distribution. If I identify that you drafted red, then I'm in good shape. Even if I end up maybe drafting blue-white, or even if I draft black-green, I wasn't in either of your colors, but I really could only tell that red was cut off, that is fine. So don't stress about being like, well, you're going to be, the person to my left is blue-white, the person to my right is red-black. It's just, you're not going to get that level of detail, and in general, you should be reading the signals as clearly as you can, which usually means figuring out the one color that's getting really cut, because often the secondary color is just hard to identify. And sometimes you can. Sometimes you can just be like, well, I saw 0 red or white cards, so the packs ended up such that the person on my right was taking red or white, and the colors were alternating, so they didn't pass either of those colors. That's just not how most drafts end up going. So if you can identify one color, you're fine. If someone says, "Oh, I thought you were going to be black-green," they're just kind of randomizing. They're like, "Well, I didn't see any black cards, and I guess I'll just name green." So
yeah, I think the thing that you want to think about with it too is. And this does go back to our signals episode that Mark was referencing, which is just that, like, the scenario is that you are taking a very specific chunk of what you've got from a bigger picture. Like, for example, there's a few things that could easily happen that could throw this off. Let's say the person to your right is in whatever 2 colors they're in, but then the person to their right is the one who's in red-white. And you immediately think, well, the person to my right's probably in red-white because I haven't seen hardly any red or white cards coming through. And the truth is, it could also just be the next person over. So they're just taking this very specific guess at 2 colors, exactly the person to their right, when the combination of, let's say you just didn't see any red or white cards coming through. It could be that 2 people to the right is in heavy red and the person to your right is in heavy white, for example. That could easily happen. 2 of them could be sharing a color. That does happen way more often than you'd think, where they're just both in white or whatever, and you're just not getting any good white cards. And again, I think it goes to the general principle of what we talked about in that episode, which was that you don't want to get too narrow with your data set. You're looking at little pieces of data, and it's the same thing. There's a poker thing too that comes up like this as well, which is that, back in the day, people used to try to figure out exactly what hand somebody else had. They're like, oh, I think you have 2 queens. That's your hand. It's 2 queens. And the truth of the matter is that in many scenarios, a person that played 2 queens might play, say, 2 jacks the same way, or 2 kings. And so the truth is that what you really think that they have is something between 10s and kings, and then maybe there's a few other hands that you would throw in by the time you've gotten to the end of it. We call that a range of hands that you're trying to figure out, rather than just one specific thing. And when it comes to Magic, it doesn't apply directly, but it's similar enough that basically you're trying to look at the colors that you're not seeing flowing, and it doesn't really matter exactly what 2 colors the person to your right is in specifically. It's like you're kind of distributing this out over like the 3 or 4 people to your right, and maybe that person to your right is the one that directly to your right is the one that has the most influence, but the next person does have influence on it too. So don't get too caught up in it. It's fun to guess. I have no problem with it. I've done it myself where I'm like, are you green red, and just trying to kind of throw it out there, but don't get it twisted. The people that are guessing like that are making, at best, roughly educated guesses, and it's not an exact science. I like the question a lot though, Mark. I've heard people say that all the time.
Yeah, that's a good question.
All right. Crack a pack. This one comes from Xander from GP Pitt. Thank you, Xander.
And are we sure people like Cracker Packs?
We'll get to that later. Just in case, right? Okay. Our first card is Dispel.
Which spell?
Yeah, that one. So counter target instant spell for blue.
As predicted and as it's remained through the whole format, it's a moderate sideboard card. It's like a card I like having one in my sideboard, and I just don't even bring in all that often.
Yeah, I've found it to be mediocre, but okay. Though I will say that there are definitely cards that my opponent can play that really do make me want to have a Dispel. And, the one that really jumps out is Grip of Desolation. Is just like, God, dispelling a grip is like, not only is it a massive mana advantage, but bringing in a card like Dispel when your opponent shows you like a grip and maybe like a Stone Fury or something along those lines is really strong because it actually gives you enough time to find the Dispel, and the fact that it costs 6 mana grip and Stone Fury 5 and maybe Royal's Retribution, like these expensive cards mean that it is a lot more likely that you're going to have the mana up for it at that point in the game, where you're not necessarily using every bit of your mana for every stretch, where sometimes people bring in Dispel, for combat tricks or cheap removal spells or whatever. And it's a lot less like you need to have it at the exact right time. You need to have not spent your mana for the turn, which is usually your goal for the first, 3, 4, 5 turns of the game. And so I definitely like to bring in Dispel when I see cards like Grip, but otherwise, Mindraker.
Mindbreaker is better than I thought it was going to be, but again, not a card I would first pick here.
Yeah, certainly not. Felidar Cub, not either. Ooh, Eldrazi Skyspawner.
All right, well, this is the best common by a decent amount. You're really happy when you can first pick an Eldrazi Skyspawner.
Yeah, the guy's great.
It's clearly going to be the winner right now, and probably will. I mean, given that it's the best common, will remain the winner until we get to the uncommons.
Yeah, we'll sift through here. So we've got Bone Splinters, absolutely not. Hedron Blade. I have had people play this card against me. I have yet to actually play it myself.
I'm very happy when my opponent plays that card against me.
Yeah, I am too.
Not a good sign for those wielding the Hedron Blade.
No.
One note about Bone Splinters, by the way, it looked like there's a chance the card is going to be great, and there are some formats where it's pretty good, but this is just not that format. The support cards weren't there, so
it sucks because the support cards are there. They're just green.
Yeah, well, they're not good enough.
So they're not there. Yeah, it's weird.
They're not present in the format.
Yeah, it's just weird because, you've got, Call the Scions, what's it called? Eyeless Watcher. You can, and random Scions. I really thought Bone Splinters was going to perform a lot better, but fortunately it just isn't quite there. A Natural Aggression is next.
Another card which did not get there. This is the worst fight card I've seen in probably since they started making fight cards in every set. So.
It is the worst fight card ever. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Prey Upon was better than this, and right down the line. I learned a very valuable lesson from a Natural Aggression, though, because you and I both graded it significantly higher. I think just off of the momentum that fight cards were generally good, and I've learned that I need to make sure that I'm keeping a close eye on exactly what the components are of the fight card. And the one thing that I really want to see is that my creature gets bigger, even if it's temporary. That's a big, big game. And the fact that this is an instant ended up being not that good, or not that relevant. Sad Stone Bridge. No.
Nope.
Cloud Manta.
It's a fine card, but nothing that really compares with Skyspawner, clearly.
Right, especially such a direct comparison. All right, so now we've hit the uncommons, and our first one is Rising Miasma.
This card has been very hit or miss. I mean, clearly it's a card that with an effect that's quite powerful, but also could do nothing.
Are you in the main deck this card, Cam?
Yeah, you should main deck this card. I just would
I
not
don't
take
ever.
it over. Oh, really?
Yeah,
well,
I always bring it out of the board.
I have been happy main decking it, but it's also the kind of card I don't take very often because I'm
why
not
do you
willing.
like it in the main?
I like it because there's just a decent amount of decks that have 1 to 2 toughness creatures that you don't need to get 4 creatures for this to be good, and because you can awaken it, even though it's not very big, you can end up often just getting a nice little 2-for-1, killing 1 creature and ending up with a creature yourself. So I think it's fine. I'm not excited about it, and again, I don't end up with this in my deck very often because I take it at a lower rate than people do in general. I'm willing to 6 pick this maybe, and people never seem to want to wait that long, so I just don't end up playing them very often.
Yeah, fair enough. I don't either, but like I said, the times when I've had it in my pool, I put it in the sideboard. I just haven't been impressed by it. I've certainly been happy taking it out of the board, though. Serene Stewart is next. She's good.
Yeah, Serene Stewart's quite good.
Yep, but again, no Sky Spawner.
Not as good as Sky Spawner.
No. I love this guy too, but it's also not as good as Sky Spawner. This is Pilgrim's Eye.
Pilgrim's Eye is very good, and in fact, once I took the Sky Spawner out of this pack, I think the next pick is probably going to be Pilgrim's Eye, unless you like first picked a card that really nailed you into like Black-White Life Gain, in which case you'd take Serene Stewart.
Ooh, here's an interesting... Oh, well, actually, I noticed that we have a foil, so I'll do that one next. It's another uncommon. It's Molten Nursery.
Yeah, I've been underwhelmed by Molten Nursery.
Same.
It's been good in some decks, but it's not a card I go out of my way to take.
Yeah, I mean, look, I have a high threshold for this stuff. I don't like conditional cards, right? Like, I don't like these cards that are, like, sometimes very good, and then other times very bad. And Molten Nursery is rarely very bad, but it's often pretty bad. And like it is quite conditional. I mean, let's just assume that you have the deck for it. That's a checkbox that you need where you've got, whatever, 20 colorless spells or whatever it is. But even beyond that, like this is very, very bad in the late game as a top deck. Like that's a real thing that does happen. If it was more powerful, you would accept that risk or that loss. But for me, I don't. Like the thing is, it doesn't always blow me away, even when I play it on turn 3 and activate it a couple of times. And I think that it does hold its own in that scenario, but it's like not mind blowing. And then on top of it, like if I draw it late, it can be just completely awful. And sometimes they just play like a 4/4 or whatever. And you're like, well, this doesn't do enough. Yeah, I have not been blown away.
Basically, the only way I end up with Molten Nursery in my deck is if I'm, deep into like red-blue or red-black Devoid and see a Molten Nursery kind of for free. When I have 6 Devoid cards in the first pack and then I get it like 7th pick, or I get it, I open it in pack 2 and I get it pick 3 pack 2 when I have 10 Devoid cards. So it's not a card I would ever first or second or third pick or even 4th pick.
All right, so now this is the interesting one, though, is our rare, because I think this speaks a lot to some of that balance that we were just referencing about, do you want the solid double or do you want the possibility for a home run, or maybe not quite a home run type of card? It's Wasteland Strangler.
Oh, I like Wasteland Strangler, and it's powerful enough that I would snap it off first pick.
Yeah, and this is interesting, right? Because you look at some cards and they have that really high ceiling, and Wasteland Strangler is one of them, right? You get a 3/2, and if you process a card, you can give a creature -3/-3 until end of turn, which is going to kill something very relevant in this format. And then I think the next step, along the line is, well, where's the floor, right? What's my worst case scenario? And as it turns out, it's not that bad here. I mean, you're getting a 3/2 for 3 mana. In black, which is, look, if you're looking at your hand and you just have no other play on 3 and you're not ingesting anything anytime soon, sure, run them out there, start attacking with your Wasteland Strangler, and that just really isn't that bad. You wouldn't want to play it on its own, but seriously, like the 3/2 for 3 is like, sure, that's fine. Yeah, I'm actually a huge fan of the Strangler as well. Every time you get it to work and you get your process on, it crushes. I mean, it's just like, God, your opponent's like, really, and the truth of the matter is you can do it quite early as like a really strong tempo play. I mean, you can, turn 2, run out your Mist Intruder, get in, they play something reasonable on turn 3, and you go Wasteland Strangler, kill it, go. And they're just like, wow, like I am so far behind now. And those type of swings, there's not that many of them in the set until you get up into the Awaken zone, where you're casting 5, 6 mana, 7 mana Awaken spells. And this one comes down on 3. So.
Yeah, I mean, Wasteland Strangler is a much, much, much better card than Sky Spawner if it's on.
Yeah.
And if you first pick a Wasteland Strangler, the odds that you can have a deck where it works is pretty high. I mean, maybe you get cut off and you can't play it, but that's true to some degree of the Sky Spawner also. And the reward here early is very worth it. Yeah. In fact, if I were blue-black and I opened these 2 cards in pack 3, I'm fairly likely to take Wasteland Strangler because it's hard to imagine being blue-black and not having a couple cards at exile. If you're like, I guess, a blue-black mid-range deck that does not have any exiling, maybe you take the Sky Spawner pack 3 over Wasteland Strangler, but I think pack 1 you're supposed to just take Wasteland Strangler.
Yeah, I think so too. I like that guy a lot. All right, so we both take Wasteland Strangler. All right, so let's get to our main topic here, Luis. This is going to be our year in review. Now we're going to break this down into a couple of parts. There is going to be limited resources specific stuff that we're going to go over. And then we're also going to go over, the sets or anything else that popped out to your mind, Luis, over the course of the year, maybe tournaments or cards or whatever for limited Magic, for, what you or I are primarily into, and what the podcast is about here. And I think we should start off with the Magic stuff. I think that's the really beefy stuff. I like going over the show stuff after, just because it's interesting to get feedback from our listeners. But I think that the meat of this topic is probably going to be in the Magic stuff. So what I wanted to do was go set by set. I wanted to just take a look at some of the sets as they came out, and it's been almost a year now since some of these sets have come out, and we've really got some distance and, it's always interesting to me, the things that stand out to me about a set. I mean, how complex and intricate a draft environment can be and all the little things that go into it. But they pop up so quickly that, I think, at least for me, my brain is forced to remember, big picture kind of things about it. And I want to go back and look at those. So let's start off with Fate Reforged. That was the first set that came out, earlier this year. And it joined up with Khans of Tarkir, which was a set that I loved. And I think it kind of made it worse, to be honest. There were some issues with Fate Reforged. You and I talked about them on the show a decent amount, Luis. Mainly with the top end power level on the rares. They just had some really kind of tough to interact with and overpowered, or at least they felt overpowered rares in that set, right? You remember like the what were those enchantments called again?
They're the siege. They're the
sieges, the siege cycle and stuff, and they were just so brutal.
Yeah, I remember distinctly having the limited discussion before the Pro Tour. This is something we do every time with our team.
You guys had your meeting, yeah.
And coming to the conclusion that something like 40% of the rares were better than all the best commons, almost all the uncommons, with also there being a bunch of really absurd uncommons. The Scalebane Elite, I think, being the best one. The 4 and a white for a 2/3.
Scaleguard Elite, yeah.
Scaleguard Elite, yes. 4 and a white for a 2/3 with bolster 2, and then whenever you attack with a creature with a counter on it, tap a creature. But then there was also the 3/3 prowess that gains flying, the Misfire Adept, and a couple more Pyrotechnics was another one. There was just like these, and Temur Sabertooth. Those were the 4, the big 4 uncommons, one from each color except black, and then plus all the rares. And
it was Elite Scaleguard, by the way. I just remembered, but sorry to interrupt.
Citadel Siege was, a true 5.0, A+, whatever you want to call it.
One of the best limited cards I've seen.
One of the best cards ever, and one of the things I really didn't like about this cycle, if we want to delve back into slightly designery stuff, is that
yeah, do it.
The best rares were all enchantments. They're just a hard card type to interact with, and a lot of colors just can't do that. Your opponent plays a turn 4 Citadel Siege, and you're just dead. You're playing red-black. What can you possibly do about that?
No, I remember that. And all they needed was random creatures lying around. It didn't even matter what they were.
And it wasn't even just Citadel Siege. Pal Siege and Outpost Siege, the red and the black ones, were also absurd. So these cards, I think they, rares being good are okay, but when there are rares like this, also Mastery of the Unseen and Ugin.
Ugin, yeah.
So you just have all these cards that are just so good, and that makes a lot of the games where you play commons and uncommons, your opponent just plays one of these rares, feel, kind of like less satisfying. And again, every set's going to have bomb rares. I don't mind bomb rares. I think they actually add to the format, but this is the number hit this threshold was too high. And that was one of my main complaints. I mean, I think FRF, had a lot of interesting cards in it. Khans was a great set. I loved Triple Khans. I think Triple Khans was my favorite set to draft, about a year in each direction, if not more. Mm-hmm. So I
loved it too.
It was very good. The thing I remember most about Fate Reforged is it was the first show I was on, or the first set I was on the show for.
Yep.
And I jumped right in for the set review, actually.
You did, yeah, right in the deep end.
So
we kept you. Somehow.
Yeah, I stayed.
Yeah,
but yeah, that was the kind of where my tenure began.
Yeah. Now, one thing I wanted to mention about Fate Reforged before we move on to Dragons, though, was that I have to say that Fate Reforged had a very tough job. Right, its role in life was actually really weird and really tough, which is that it was the pivot set between Khans of Tarkir and Dragons of Tarkir, right? And normally you think, yeah, that's fine, whatever. It's the middle set. Middle sets are kind of weird. But remember, it needed to play as well as possible with a 3-colored morph set right? Like this kind of deep, crazy, lots of colors, lots of stuff going on type set. And then it needed to pivot over and play well with Dragons of Tarkir, which we'll talk about next, which was a 2-color, more straightforward type set, with a totally different set of, ideas and the way that the set was implemented. And I mean, can you imagine? I mean, you're a game designer. Like, if your boss came up to you and was like, all right, you're the lead designer for a set, and here's what it needs to do. It needs to complement this, which is one thing. And then a month later or 3 months later, it needs to completely leave that behind. That set's not even on the table. And now it has to complement this, which is a totally different thing. That's a lot to ask for one set. That's not a lot of cards to accomplish that goal.
It really is. It's a difficult challenge. It's not one that I think they did a bad job on.
No, I don't either.
I do think like Manifest was a good bridge because it fit well with Morph. Morph and Manifest obviously kind of go together, and then it played well in Dragons. And I actually liked Fate Reforged Dragons. Not to preview what we're about to talk about, but I liked Fate Reforged Dragons a fair amount.
Yeah. So I think it did it. I mean, look, I don't know that there was going to be a way to make that perfectly clean and awesome. But I do think that they did do it. Like, they pulled it off. Like, it did work with both sets. So, bravo.
It felt like a cohesive draft experience on both ends.
Yeah.
I just wish the rares and Fate Reforged are dialed back a little. And Fate Reforged, it was going to be hard to stack up against Triple Cons. Triple Cons was a set that had a lot of really good flavor and good gameplay. So, that was going to be hard to top or even measure up to regardless.
Yeah, for sure. And that's always tough. It's the downside of making something sweet is that if you the next thing you put out
the next person in line has a tougher job.
Yes, exactly. All right. So Fate Reforged, ultimately though, it wasn't a main, like it wasn't the driving force behind either, Cons or Dragons. It was just there to kind of facilitate both. So let's move on to Dragons, because that one, really did set a much different stage for what we were going to be drafting. I remember, looking back on it, I think it was fine, right? Like I wouldn't give it like super high marks. I don't, it's not like I'm clamoring to go back and draft Dragons of Tarkir. But I remember it being a perfectly reasonable draft format with reasonable options. But perhaps maybe nothing stood out to me as like particularly fun or exciting. I remember the exploit deck being my favorite thing to do. But that's like not that surprising because that was also just one of the best decks. And, kind of fits what I want to be doing there anyway. That was the only deck that really stood out to me as one of the ones that I wanted. Though I will say that it kind of felt core set-ish a little bit. Like, I felt like it was missing something. And that could have just been me coming off of Cons, which definitely was not like a core set, right? I mean, Cons were super deep.
The cards in Dragons I think tend to be a little simpler, and we're back to just a straight 2-color format in general with a lot of very straightforward cards.
Exactly.
Which I think goes there. So my notes for this section are Blue-Black Exploit is open. That is what I wrote for Dragons.
I feel like you may have written that on your hand every time you drafted and just stick with the plan. It's open.
I did like that deck, but I did top 8 GP Atlantic City by just drafting Blue-Black Exploit twice and going 6-0 in drafts.
Yeah, so. You did. You did it.
Ruthless Deathfang,
yeah, your buddy. You had like multiples, didn't you?
Oh yeah. I Ruthless Deathfang, Sidisi's Faithful was a very fun interaction. So, the Deathfang's the 4/4 flyer that whenever you sacrifice a creature, they sacrifice a creature, your opponent does. And Faithful is the 1-mana 0/4 that has Exploit, bounce a creature. So you just like play Faithful, Exploit, bounce to the Faithful back. Basically, it's just 1 blue, sacrifice a creature, your opponent sacrifice a creature, and you could sack the Faithful itself, bounce their second best creature, and make them sacrifice their best creature when they only had 2 creatures. So it was a lot of good stuff, and I enjoyed doing that. I enjoyed playing Dragons, but it wasn't like a home run for me. It was just good. I think it was just good, solid gameplay.
That's how I felt too. It's interesting too to note this stuff, right? Because like the bar that Wizards has set is quite high. Right. Like the thing is, we're a little spoiled on it, like in the sense that it wouldn't be hard for them to come out with a set that just sucked. Right. It was just like, boring, or they tried something and it didn't work, or that had fundamentally terrible issues that made it like, I don't want to play this. And they just don't do that, right? Like when they come out with a set like Dragons of Tarkir, which again, I think is like, you know, it's a solid like B or B minus or whatever. Like it's fun. There's nothing completely broken. There's nothing really that jumps out as like, this is super exciting. And I drafted it a bunch, right? Like that was just sort of like status quo type set. But it's funny because looking back on it, it almost feels like negative somehow. Right? Like I almost feel like, you know, just because it didn't like completely blow my mind or whatever, that it's like not as good. And it's just not the case. Like I enjoyed the set. I think they did a good job with it. It just doesn't stand out in the past like a set like Cons or, you know, some of my other favorites that were there.
And that takes us into Origins here.
Yes, Origins, which of course was the last core set.
It was the last core set, and yeah, I feel like Origins really pulled a bait and switch on us because, you know, we're both walking in hoping that they're just really going to blow it out for the last core set. They had these like flip planeswalkers, which were really cool and actually played very well.
Yeah.
I think the flip planeswalkers were a success, but they had, and this is the part that really aggravates me, they had all these build arounds. They had all these uncommon build arounds. We did the set review and we're like, oh yeah, there's Gear Per Aether Grid. There's, you know, Shadows of the Past. There's just like all these elf cards. And it's just like, none of those decks work. No. What you should do in Origins, you should take your 2-drops. That's what you should do. And then you should play your 2-drops, then you should play a combat trick. And it's like, yeah, that's great. A lot of people liked Origins, and I think Origins played like a fine core set. But coming off of Dragons, which was a lot of that experience already, and filled with cards which looked like you should be building sick decks around, I don't know. It feels like I would have enjoyed Origins more if these build-arounds weren't there because they were all just traps. And that I found very unpleasant.
And they set your expectations up.
Were just,
yeah.
So
yeah, it was funny because I'm a big fan of drafting core set. I've enjoyed it since they came out. I remember drafting M10 when it first came out and being like, I remember thinking in my head, well, I'm getting pretty good at draft now, and this is probably going to be a step down from what I really want. Because I wanted like, you know, bring me some, you know, 5-color nonsense. Like I wanted some deep, complex stuff. And then I remember feeling like, God, this is really nice. Like it's straightforward, but like it rewards my draft style. Especially at the time, which was, you know, very straightforward. And like, I was decent at evaluating cards at the time and like felt like, okay, this is really like something that I'm having a lot of fun with. And I tended to do well in it too, which always makes it seem more fun. But then, you know, and as time went by, I enjoyed a lot of them. M13 is one of my favorite sets, period. I really liked M14 for like the change of pace on slowing everything down. M15 was okay. You know, M12 was more aggressive, and M11 I can't remember much about. But, you know,
M11
I remember
was great.
That was the blue one, right?
That was the one where I always draft. No, that was M4. That was M12. M11.
12 was the blue?
M11. Either way, one of the M sets.
Now that we're going back like 5 years or whatever.
Yeah, I guess it was M10. Now you think about it, I love drafting white aggro.
Yeah, that was the one with the 2/1 flyer for 2, right? The Pegasus or whatever. So, yeah, get in there.
But anyways, continue.
Yeah, as we take a trip deep down memory lane.
Looking at the feedback, and again, we'll get to this later. I'm supposed to, I think, interrupt you more is what a couple people said. So
yeah. But yeah, and so coming into Origins, I was thinking like, oh, this is going to be great. It's going to be the last one. I like core sets, but you know, I guess they got to go or whatever. And it was so funny because by the end of it, I had similar feelings to the way I did about Dragons. I liked it, but you know, I thought the set was okay. It didn't fit my personal wishes for draft that much anymore because it was a little too stripped down, a little too combat, and just like there wasn't really much you could do to go deep in any scenario, and you were basically punished for doing anything other than taking, you know, token free blades and whatnot. But the funny thing about it was that after it was sort of winding down, I was thinking about it, and I was like, yeah, you know, this set just didn't really go deep enough for like where I'm at with draft or what I really want. And then I was thinking, you know, I'm like, yeah, but it did have like kind of a lot going on. If you didn't really know, like to draft just a straightforward beatdown type deck. And I had kind of a light bulb moment where I'm like, oh, right. That's why they're getting rid of core set because like it didn't suit my needs particularly well. And I don't think that a new player would like, I think it should be even stripped down a little bit more for a new player. And that was the reason that they decided for getting rid of core sets was that they just weren't really serving any chunk of their customer base or prospective customer base well enough. And so they were going to differentiate it out by getting rid of it and putting a regular set in its spot and then coming up with some type of other thing to serve the newer players, which I don't think they've really done quite yet. But I'm still kind of waiting to see what they come up with for that.
I think that Origins did hit that. I mean, I remember listening to a lot of people's feedback on the show and just talking to people, and a lot of people did mention they liked drafting Origins and they understood it. So I don't think it was a failure for people who were looking for a more core set draft experience. So I think that there's a time and a place for these. I think Origins overall was fine. Again, it was another set which I would give a passing grade. It just wasn't. I just wish it didn't have those build-arounds there.
Yeah, those were a bit of a trap for sure. I don't know. I guess it's as good as any of a core set to go out on, though. So fair enough. And I did think the Planeswalkers were sweet, and holy crap, they've certainly done their part in Constructed, especially Jace. All right, so that brought us out of the summertime and into the fall, which is just a few months back from now, and that brought us to Battle for Zendikar. And, we're still drafting BFZ, so it's kind of hard to get too much separation on it. And we'll do a sunset show for Battle for Zendikar where we go much, much deeper. But, it is interesting that it was accompanied by the big hype, right? We always see the big, fall set spoiler season type stuff come up and get people super, super excited for it. So far, I think it's fallen a little short of where I was hoping it would be as far as draft goes. I draft it still. I'm still drafting it. Like I drafted it yesterday or whatever, and I'll still draft it. So that's a big compliment. I'm not off of it or anything like that. So I think the set's good. And when I look back on it, I think I'll think positive things about the set overall. But it does have some shortcomings, right? Green being sort of out of whack with the rest of the colors as far as how much worse it is certainly a downside. I think it hurts the format a bit. I think those green cards could have used some bumps to bring them up and make the format a little bit more balanced. I find myself drafting blue like every draft now. Like it's just it's just like,
really?
Yeah, I just draft blue basically every single draft. I can't remember the last time I didn't draft blue something.
I might have to try that, actually.
Yeah. Either blue, white or blue, black tend to be the ones that I usually go for. And I'm partial to blue, like normally. And I know that, but like, I don't feel like this is me just being like, oh, I just want to play blue. I just think it's the best color in the format. And I think it gives you the best options where you can go into blue, white and do the Flyers thing. If people are snapping up the devoid cards, and you can go into blue, black or blue, red. If they're not, I meant to say blue, red, not blue, black before. But either way, any one of those three color combos, I'm really happy to be in. And basically any other one, I'm not that happy to be in. So I just end up sort of pivoting from blue to other things every single time, which I don't mind it. Like I like playing those cards a lot, but I don't know. That doesn't seem ideal. Like my favorite draft formats, I always feel much more open. When I open up my pack, I feel like anything could happen. I could go any direction. And I don't feel like that with Battle for Zendikar. I feel like a little more shoehorned in.
Yeah, it's funny because you can list these reasons that make it sound like it would. I think that the format does not have a lot of replayability to it. You're like, well, you can never draft green. Mm-hmm. These blue decks are so much better than all the other decks.
But I'm still drafting it.
Those things are true, but I've been having a really good time drafting it. I've done more Battle for Zendikar drafts than I have any other format since Triple Cons, which...
same here. Why is that?
For me, I think personally there's two reasons. One is that I'm streaming a lot more. That's something I'm doing multiple times a week, which makes me draft more often. So that is a kind of metagame reason that I'll be doing this. But the other is that I just enjoy these games. I think that the play of the games in Battle for Zendikar is quite good. They have a lot of ways to use excess mana. They have cards like Valakut Invoker, Awaken cards, playable 7 drops point. Like Ruin Processor, which means you can play 18 or even 19 lands and not really get flooded all that often. And they have a lot of modal spells. Again, Awaken counts here too, where you have multiple ways to play your spells. You have a lot of synergy cards, like all the Devoid synergies and like the life gain synergies. Not as much the ally synergies, again, because of how bad green is. Which, yeah, I agree the format would be better if green was better. But I still think overall this experience is one I like a lot. So
me too. It's weird.
Yeah, Battle for Zendikar is one I'm a big fan of. I again, you can list the reasons why you should not like this format, but I just actually do like it, and I play it a lot. And I'm probably not going to play it a ton here on out because, and segue here, our Cube is out now, and Holiday Cube is going to dominate my drafts until it's gone. But I still enjoy Battle for Zendikar. Months into the format, I'm still drafting it. And I'll be honest, a lot of sets, like Origins, for example, I would draft it here and there throughout its lifespan, but after about a month, I was not really super into it. Like I would still draft it because I still like drafting and I love playing Magic, but Battle for Zendikar, I'm like, ooh, I wonder what I'm going to do in my next Battle for Zendikar draft. Origins, it was like, yeah, I'll do a draft of Origins and I'll probably play some 2-drops.
Yeah, I feel the same. It's weird. It's like part of me doesn't want to, like, I like being analytical. That's what we're, part of our job on the show and stuff. But at the same time, I also just kind of don't fight it. Like I said, I can name some of the things that I don't like about the set, but I'm still drafting it. And to me, that's kind of all that really matters. I think what you said about the fact that there's a lot of different ways to sink mana into the late game and also a lot of different play when it comes to like, when do I play my spells and how do I play them? That is huge for me. I found that the sets that I really like, going back to Khans of Tarkir that had Morph, which was similar, where you just always had places to put your mana. I love sets like that. And it means to me that the game's more flexible. I think it's more skill testing as well as, if you can look at different points in the game and look further down the line and know when to just fire off that awaken spell for its not awaken cost or when it's really important to wait. I think that those are things that are all, rewarded by this set. And that's really cool. I think that kind of stuff goes a really long way towards making the set, a lot better. Just invokers around that you can just dump mana into. I think that's really good too. And ultimately, one of the downsides I think to the set was that the archetypes ended up being pretty linear, and it's okay. Like, you can do that. I tend to prefer sets that aren't like that, but somehow they kind of just pulled it off. I don't know. I just find myself drafting similar decks each time, but I really like playing them. So yeah,
I think the gameplay really shines through, and
that is it, right? That's what we're really saying.
That really is what makes a huge impact. Like, the draft portion matters too. You want to have draft archetypes that are aspirational, where you get there and you're really happy and you miss and you're like, man, next time I want to try to get there.
Mm-hmm.
But if the gameplay isn't there, just it kind of all doesn't matter, and the gameplay really is there for Battle for Zendikar.
Yeah, that is a really good way to put that. Yeah, no, I agree. I think so too. All right, so you hinted about Cube a minute ago. Let's talk about Cube, because this was kind of a cool year for Cube, actually. WotC, in addition to the Legacy Cube and the Holiday Cube, decided that they were going to experiment a little bit and try something different. And they tried to a thing called the Legendary Cube, which just, relatively recently ended its run on Magic Online. And I have kind of mixed feelings on the Legendary Cube. I felt like it did what we were promised, which was huge splashy effects, kind of along the lines of what you would see in Commander, but in a cube setting instead. It highlighted the strength of Cube, of regular Cube for me, which was diversity of play. And what I mean by it highlighted it is it showed me how much I value it, because while the Legendary Cube was fun for a while, it didn't hold my attention as long as the Legacy Cube or the Holiday Cube have, which is basically I'll draft those from start to finish once they're on Magic Online. And, the reasoning I think is just because while it did open the door for us to do huge, crazy 5-color, big stuff, whatever, that was kind of all you could do. I mean, yeah, there's a beatdown deck or whatever, but that's not what I'm coming to that cube for. And I don't think that deck was particularly good anyway. Even though I know some people had success with it, but, it ended up being such a one note thing that even though that note is something that I really do like to try to do sometimes in the cube, in the regular cube, it showed that the reason why I like to do that weird thing is because it's different from what I normally do, right? Like, it stands out. Like, some person's playing green, white, fair stuff, and I'm playing 5-color nonsense, right? And trying to just do crazy stuff. And the reason why I think that's cool is because it's different than what you normally do. When everybody's doing it, it lost a little bit of its luster for me. And so I didn't, I wasn't quite in love with the Legendary Cube, but I do think it was fun. Like, I mean, I certainly had fun with it, especially when it first came out.
So the things I liked about the Legendary Cube, the most important one is it means that they're willing to try offbeat cubes with a more dramatic.
Yeah, I thought that was great.
I think that's good. I think that having the willingness to go for new cube experiences is definitely a great sign. I would love to see more of it. I also did enjoy the first one I did. The second one I enjoyed a lot less, and during my third cube draft, I'm like, I'm not drafting this cube again. It's just
it was that strong for you, huh?
It was just 5-color nonsense every single time. And yes, I know some people who like this cube say that there are more distinct archetypes, and there are, slightly more than that. But this just didn't feel distinct enough for me. So I think that it's fine if people like this cube, because I know people who did like it, and that makes sense to me. There's a lot of fun stuff going on. And again, like I said, it's good to try new things. This cube wasn't for me, but hey, we're back with a cube that is for me. We're right in the midst of the holiday cube, which I love the legacy cube and I love the holiday cube. These are the two cubes, one basically with all the Power 9 cards and all the broken cards, and one without. And they're both just tons of fun. So I enjoyed them. I'm looking forward to the cube, whatever cubes show up next year, which I imagine, slightly educated guess, that there will be a number of cubes, and some of them will be things that are a little more themed than what we're used to. And I'm greatly looking forward to that. I love cube. It's always hard for me to know how much we should talk about cube. We did a cube episode, and it was quite well received, but
indeed,
I imagine we should not be doing 5 cube episodes a year, for example.
No, I don't think so. But I think it is an important part of the limited landscape. We need to touch on it.
It really is. A lot of people's experience of playing limited is through cube, and there's a lot to talk about there. So
also, it just happens to be I think both of it's like my favorite way to play limited. I think it's yours too.
My favorite way to play limited is probably like drafts number 5 through 15 of a new format.
Oh, okay.
Because at that point I know a little bit about what's going on. I'm not just completely taking shots in the dark, but it's been so few drafts that I haven't drafted everything, and I have a lot left to
There's
discover.
Still that challenge and that newness.
Right. So those are my favorite, but cube is where cube would rank on my all-time formats is in the top 5 somewhere, right? If you told me all right, you have to pick 5 limited formats and you can never draft any others, cube would be in that list.
Yeah. I mean, and the cube's repeatable, right? Your sweet spot there only lasts for a few drafts each time. And cube, you can just fire up whenever it's on and do it. But yeah, I think that the headliner here though isn't, how much did you like the legendary cube? I liked it more than you did, but again, I wasn't enthralled with it. I was like, okay, I'm kind of done with this after I probably did 10 or 15 of them. I did more than you did, but not, but again, I could have done 30 or whatever. And so I was like, yeah, these one note cubes are cool, but the real key here is that they are willing to experiment. They're willing to push the boundaries and try some new stuff. And that I commend them for that. I think that that's a great thing. And it could lead us to some really exciting cubes down the line too, that we just haven't even thought of yet. So good on WotC for being willing to push the boundaries there. Okay. So that was all the other sets. Anything else stand out for you from the last year as far as limited goes? From any sets or tournaments or anything that jumped out to you?
Nothing that we didn't already cover. It was an interesting year. One of the takeaways though is it was kind of like a year of lasts, where it's the last core set, and moving forward, blocks of limited are going to be big set, small set, big set, small set, big set, small set. So we're about to enter kind of a different cadence and a different era of how limited is going to work. It's going to be interesting seeing how that goes.
Yeah, no, that was really probably the biggest headliner from a big picture perspective. I mean, there's all these sets and stuff, but yeah, that's huge. I mean, ever since I've come back, and I guess ever since draft has been a thing, it's just always been thought of in terms of blocks of 3. Though I will say that, over the last, 5 years or whatever, they've deviated from that pretty significantly on pretty regularly as well. The Dragons Cons and Dragons block never ended up being 3 full sets. And, going back to Rise of the Eldrazi, that broke up the Zendikar block, that happened a lot anyway. But I'm super curious to see how much this changes. And, of course, we'll be with you here at LR trying to sort this through and see if there's anything we need to pay extra attention to as we go. Okay, so let's move on to the second part of our show here, Luis. This is the LR stuff. And we're not going to take quite as long on this, I don't think, as the sets, but I did want to go over this because, I don't know, it's just really helpful, right, for us to be able to stay in touch and in tune with our audience and what's going on with them. It can be easy when you make content to get a little bit autopilot-y and just sort of, kind of keep making stuff and not really touching base with what the audience is saying. And also, I will say that as a content creator, as somebody who makes content in various ways, the public can get scary, right? Like they can be really, really harsh about a lot of different things. Like you and I are in the booth for coverage pretty often. You and I also both write articles for Wizards and, for Channel Fireball and such, and, and put up videos on Channel Fireball and do streaming. And, people can be really critical, but I have to say that, like,
I haven't really experienced that, but I
whatever. I could show you some if you, you have experienced significantly less than really anybody. I will give you that. But, everybody has their naysayers or people that think that they're, bad or whatever. But I got to say that it's really great that we are so tight knit with our listeners on the podcast, and it's never been an issue. I think our listeners, and if, you put up a thread on the, what's it called, on the subreddit, and, it's just like, there was a lot of critical things in there, right? Like, but it was all constructive criticism. It was just, that's reasonable. That's a totally fine standpoint to have. And when you have such a good relationship with the listeners like that you can ask for feedback and actually get actionable, reasonable feedback, it's just great. Like, I think that, one of the things that you brought to the show, Luis, is that you ask for that often. Like you're really into hearing that stuff. And I think it's really good to touch base on that. And that's what we're going to do here.
Well, yeah, as people who listen to the show and frequent the subreddit or see Twitter can know, I love getting feedback. I think that's a way for me to do my job better and to make it makes the people giving feedback happier. Because first of all, you're listening to them, which people like being listened to. Yeah. And second of all, if it's good feedback, which it overwhelmingly has been, it just makes the show better.
Yes.
So it's not like we're looking at all right, we're going to do exactly what everyone says, but it's like a lot of people have ideas, and the ideas that a lot of people repeat, like when a lot of the people say the same thing, then we like to pay attention to them. And I will admit, having come on the show, my journey through this show has been greatly aided by the fact that people are ready and willing to give good constructive feedback. That's the awesome part. It's not just people saying, hey, you suck, because maybe that's true, but that's not useful. But it's more like, I liked when you did this, or I didn't like when you did this. And I certainly listen to that. Again, not saying I act on every single thing everyone says, but I love having that, having that access to that information, because I don't know, I like getting feedback on what I do. That's just one of the things that drives me. And people have been very good about that, including all the things that they just said that we're about to talk about here. So
so let's get into a few of them. I pulled a couple of ones that I thought this would be interesting talking points for you and I from the subreddit, but there were a lot of comments on there. So, this doesn't represent everything. But yeah, so one of the things that I pulled here was from Prayon, and Prayon says, I feel like you and Brian talked more about what kind of decks, and this is for, when Brian Wong was on the show still, what kind of decks you were playing and what worked for you in the last week. During Theros block, I could usually tell what was Marshall's favorite deck. I have no idea what he enjoys most playing and what he wins most in Battle for Zendikar. I think that should be discussed more. And that's just something that, is kind of a, I guess a stylistic difference, is that, for whatever reason, Brian and I would talk more about the decks that we were actually drafting that week. And you and I tend not to. We're a little more regimented with our, with the show notes and kind of making sure that we're on topic and stuff like that. And, that's something that I think I can totally agree, that we should talk about that a little bit more. What kind of decks are we winning with? What kind of decks are we drafting? Maybe even just what deck did you draft this week that stood out to you? Right? Like, oh, I finally tried this blah, blah, blah deck, this, green Eldrazi ramp deck, and I actually got it to work this one time, and give some thoughts about that. I talked about it earlier on this episode, right? I like drafting blue. I've been drafting blue-red, blue-black, and blue-white basically exclusively. And, I think that's valuable, right? That's something that people, they want to know what we're up to. And I think we should make sure that when we have something to say about it, we find a place to hit it up.
I will point people to our streams. We're both now streaming.
Yes, that is a very good point.
I take the evening shift, from about 6 or 7 Pacific until around 11, and Marshall takes the late shift.
The handoff, yeah.
Well, yeah, I'll always host Marshall when he's on. So
I do appreciate that. We had a good time last night of me and Woody fighting over some play that we couldn't decide.
And if you want to see what we're drafting, that's a good place to do it. I do agree with you. We should mention a little bit more in the show, but the fact that we stream a lot now means that you have access to that as well. So
no, that's a good point. And also videos, right? We've both got videos up of us drafting Battle for Zendikar right now on Channel Fireball. And so if you want to get a good feel for that, one thing that I know a lot of people like to do is just watch the draft portion. they're less interested in seeing how the games play out, and they're more interested in just seeing how you or I or somebody approaches the draft portion of it. And I think that you can get a good feel for that too, without having to spend quite as much time watching if you're short on time. Mandlinder added something to the thread as well. Mandlinder says, I really liked your pun primer. So I should have probably deleted that. He also says, or he or she also says, I really like it when you open random packs. I know it's entertainment, but I can hear the pain in Marshall's voice, and that pleases me. And the last point was, I guess that's not very helpful feedback, but I thought you should know. And I just wanted to say that I 100% agree with you, Mandlinder. That is not very helpful feedback.
I also agree that I definitely think we should know.
It is funny though. I wanted to bring it up almost as a joke, but you open packs on like a couple of shows and people have really there was a lot of comments about it. And the thing, it's like, you don't do it every show unless I'm just missing something.
I've literally done it on 2 shows.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
It's been very loud in terms of like the impression it's made, which I think is really funny.
I think it is too. Yeah. What about the next one from Poison Taffy?
Poison Taffy says, I like the abbreviations you came up with, cabs, Uber, but I think you should make a point to repeat what they mean every episode they're used in. It takes a second, and if you're not a regular, they can be quite confusing. All right, so...
Agree.
I agree. These were both jokes, but people latched onto them.
It's funny.
Again, these were the impact of these were louder than I thought it would be. Cabs means a card that affect the board strategy theory, since we also put a theory on the end. And Uber means ultimate big end game ramp. So these are just
I always forget what Uber means.
But they do actually serve a purpose, and this is the non-joke part of this is they are a shorthand, and shorthands let you transmit a lot of information into one short phrase. So even if we take a second to explain it, which really does not take very long, it means that we can use it later in the episode. But I agree that we should you should explain what they mean. Like LR, even from way before I got here, kind of has a lot of jargon.
Yes.
Vanilla test, quadrant theory.
Don't be Roddy, yeah.
And even though that helps listeners be invested and it helps listeners, again, understand a complex theory with just a word, it does also mean that we should be diligent about making sure newer listeners aren't confused or intimidated or scared off by these random things they just have no real way to understand. So that is very good feedback.
Yeah, I like that. Well, I mean, I think it's one of those things that I think there's 2 things at play. The first one is, with great power comes great responsibility that you regularly abuse, which is people might not know it.
Strong word.
Look, the thing is, at some point, negligence becomes abuse. And the truth of it is that Luis's God-given mutant superpower is to take something that's absolutely nothing and make it into a thing that, for whatever reason, people repeat or find funny or whatever it is. I've seen him do this. I've been friends with Luis for multiple years now, and I have seen him do this with the most absurd stuff. And for whatever reason, it just sticks. The Paul thing, the monkey jokes with me, the cabs and Uber. You open a couple of packs on the air to troll me for a couple of episodes, and it's just sticks in people's consciousness. I don't know how you got this power, but I do know that you are abusing it. You're not harnessing it. You know how the X-Men guy has those goggles so that when he opens his eyes, he doesn't just kill everybody. You need some goggles, my friend.
Look, my superpower is to create and perpetuate memes. And
yes, that's what it is. It's unbelievable.
And I do it without even trying, apparently.
Yeah, you do. No, but the truth of it is that for, Luis's superpower aside, there is a balance to be struck here, right? Being able to have shorthand things like saying cabs and Uber and Roddy and that kind of thing is really useful. I think that it makes people feel like they're a little bit more a part of a community that we're in and that they value the things that we value, but it has this barrier where it can become exclusionary. If you don't explain it often enough and let people know. And that's on us, right? That's on us to make sure that we don't throw these terms around and just assume that every one of our listeners knows the term by heart and exactly what we're talking about. So we'll work on that. We'll make sure that if we're going to use one of these things that we just give a brief explanation. And the truth of it is, I think if we give a brief explanation, we're afraid the people that are listening that already know are going to be like, yeah, we know, I listen to that show. I know what you're talking about. But the truth of it is that it doesn't really work that way. I've listened to podcasts where people have explained the same thing multiple times over and over and over and over again. And it makes me feel like more a part of the podcast because I know what the person's going to say and it reinforces things for me. So I think it's totally safe and in bounds for us to go ahead and just touch on those again and say, when we say Cavs here, we're talking about cards that affect the board state and that kind of stuff. One more from Bat Boss. Bat Boss says, I don't care much about sealed personally, since I'm mostly an MTGO draft only kind of guy. I don't mind having one episode, a format for them though. I want to address that, but then the other one was Bat Boss has 2 points. I also really like the episodes with the extended Crack-a-Packs. Crack-a-Pack is usually my favorite part of the whole episode, so the extended ones are just awesome. Now, there's 2 things, and we're going to go over some of the takeaways here as we wrap up this episode of the show. But I did want to hit up on these 2 because one of the takeaways that we're going to talk about it regards sealed, and one of them regards Crack-a-Packs. We got a lot of feedback on both of these things, and I think it was really useful, at least for me, to read these, as one of the things that guides the show is actually, and it has guided the show, for a really long time, has been me and my intuitions on things, right? Because the truth of it is we don't have like data, right? Like I can't go to Luis and be like, hey, pull up the report from 3 months ago about how many people like Crack-a-Packs or how many people don't or whatever. And so I'm going off of, what I have learned after having done the show for as long as I've done it, and just my intuition about what I think the listeners want and how it works and what role the show is supposed to play, what kind of audience we're supposed to hit and that kind of thing. And I think that these 2 things are really interesting because my intuition is that Crack-a-Pack is one of the more popular things on the show. And you and I, Luis, had a discussion like a month ago or something about, should we scale back Crack-a-Packs as we go further into the set? Because they clearly lose some value, right? Like the Crack-a-Pack we did tonight isn't nearly as important as the one we did, a week after the set came out, where people are really clamoring to get an idea for what it is. But, I said, no, I think we should keep them. I think people really like them. I think they're like kind of an easy thing that can give people an idea. And my main reasoning for it was that it's easy to underestimate how intimidating it can be for people that don't draft as often as you and I, or even some of our listeners, where they sit down, they open up a pack, and they're just looking at this pack like blank stare. They know all these things about the format, but now they have to make a pick and they have to make it now. And that can be really tough. So hearing the thought process I'm working through, even at this stage, kind of is a way to de facto update our listeners about where we're at on a format. And then also just has that thing. And then also people just love, the act of opening a booster pack. I know you don't know anything about that.
I know that, but yeah. To your point about not having data, that is one of the things I like being, especially with the LRcast subreddit, is more aggressive on asking people what they want and what they like.
I mean, like this thing that you did here and this whole episode that we're talking about is a form of data, right? It does give us some votes. It's just really tough because like we're fallible like anybody else, right? Like, if we get one email from somebody who strongly worded says that they like or don't like something, it sticks in my head, even though that's one person's vote, and they very well may not represent the majority of our listeners, so it's really tough, to sort those things through because the feedback that you do get, you want to listen to, right? And then I think the flip side of the coin, was the sealed, which was something that you brought to the table is like, we should make this more regimented. We should do a sealed for basically every set where it's relevant, where people are playing PPTQs in it or whatever. And it just made sense to me when you said it, but the response we've got has been very good. Like people have been like, we want this, like we want more sealed. And I would have thought, I think they're more into the draft stuff and we'll touch on sealed, but they wanted at least a full episode on sealed on each of the sets. And now we're doing that. And that was certainly good. So I wanted to put that one in from Bat Boss there because I think that he hit on a couple of the bigger picture things that we talked about. Some takeaways?
Oh, the first one we kind of just talked about. People love Crack-a-Packs. They want us to do the Crack-a-Draft more often. And
yes.
So you put a bunch of takeaways in. I added a couple more. And then I also added goals to the end of these.
Oh, I didn't see these yet.
The ones where it's appropriate. Because this is like, what are we going to do to respond to this takeaway? And my goal here is to explore more Crack-a-Pack style of stuff. There's stuff like us setting up packs to make them more interesting rather than just opening a random pack.
Uh-huh.
There's stuff like what we did at the episode with Tim Willoughby, which was a great episode, by the way, where he, set us up an extended Cracker Pack where we had a bunch of packs open in a row where we could just do the first 4 picks. We could even do almost a whole draft or first 8 picks, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
There's just a lot of territory to explore here where we want to balance being able for you to visualize this in your head because you're listening to it. We couldn't do a whole draft this way, I don't think. I don't think that would work out very well. You're not going to remember 20 cards. But, doing 5 more, 3 to 5 pack, Cracker Pack sort of things, I think could be really good, and people do like them. So I think one of our goals going forward is to kind of investigate how can we take Cracker Pack to the next level. There's a lot of stuff we could do there.
Yeah, so, I think we should start trying to fit one episode in per set where we do the Tim Willoughby style, the deeper, the Cracker Draft or however you want to call it. I just like the thing that really stood out to me, Luis, was from the comments wasn't just that people were like, that was fun, I liked it. They said they found it really interesting to get our thoughts as we went deeper into the packs and how to weigh out, am I switching colors? Cause one of the things that regular Cracker Pack completely misses is the discussion we had on signals from last week, which is, one piece of the puzzle, but it gets a look at the big picture there about, do I switch colors? Do I move into a second color for this card or not? Right. And this is stuff that's just hard to illustrate. We talk about it a lot. I think we do a good job with it, but seeing it or hearing it in real time as we're actually looking at random packs and in, air quotes, real life, I think that has a value to people that's a lot higher than just, the regular Cracker Pack.
Number 2 is Luis opening packs randomly for 2 shows really had an impact one way or another.
I noticed that there's no goal.
There's no goal associated here, but this was a good takeaway.
That was your mission accomplished.
Number 3, sealed deck episodes are a big hit. And our goal is to make sure the format warrants it, because one of the things people did say was, hey, if it's just too much like draft, you don't need to do a sealed episode on it. My word of caution here is every format pretty much is going to warrant a sealed episode. Sealed is very difficult, way harder than people think. There's more intricacies going on than people suspect. So if we play a format and come to the conclusion that we don't need to do a sealed episode, maybe we won't. My guess is that does not happen next year. So
now, I had a question for you about this.
Yes, sir.
Small sets. So, Oath of the Gatewatch comes out. And it's not its own sealed format. It's going to be in addition to Battle for Zendikar. What do you envision the sealed episode for Oath of the Gatewatch looking like? Is it just to contrast the difference between the power level and whatever of the sealed cards versus draft, which is what we'll mainly be talking about? Or do you envision us talking about it okay, now we've got a completely different sealed format. Let's cover that.
It kind of depends on how much the format shifts. Because some sets shift formats more than others.
Right.
My guess is there's still going to be enough meat there to really justify it. Sealed is hard. Sealed gets a bad rap. I've said this almost every time we've talked about sealed, that practice really does pay off, and knowing what you're doing in sealed really does increase your win percentage by a drastic amount. I've taken, even not even counting the podcast at all, in my own preparation for sealed events like sealed Grand Prix, I've taken it a lot more seriously than I used to. I used to be like, well, it's just sealed. I'll just go and see what I open. I've done a lot better since I've started preparing harder, and I think that makes me think we should always just do an episode on it.
Okay, yeah, that's good.
I feel like there's just percentage to be gained there that most people don't get.
No, I agree. And again, one of the things we talked about when we do the sealed episodes is that sealed is so important for people that are looking to move up in the tournament scene, right? If they want to go to PPTQs and play limited, or if they want to go to a Grand Prix, you're playing sealed. So it's just, it is just that important for people that are looking to level up that aspect.
Can you read number 4 here?
Yeah. So number 4 was they'd like us to disagree a bit more often, which I think is really a funny thing, because this has been one of the things that I've gotten feedback, and I'm probably the only one that can give this perspective because I've been here for each of the co-hosts that have come through, and I've had different relations with each of the co-hosts. Sometimes I disagreed more, like John and I tended to get into it more. Brian and I didn't as much. And you and I don't that much.
I think you meant relationships, but go on.
But the funny thing, the funny thing is that I don't like faking that. You know what I mean? I don't want to. I saw one of the comments was well, maybe one of you could play devil's advocate, and that is a reasonable request, I think, to say, well, I'm going to push you a little here and make you I'm gonna say, even if I happen to agree with what you're saying, Luis, I'm gonna say, well, what about this? And kind of nudge you in a different direction and kind of make you, react to that or whatever. And I think that there is something to be said for that. But, the things that you're hearing on the show from Luis and I are just genuine opinions from us. And the truth of the matter is that in many ways, Luis and I have a similar style. Like, he's obviously a much better player than I am, but I aspire, to do that. And when it comes to the theoretical things, him and I tend to line up pretty closely. There's a few things that will, like we did in the Crack-A-Pack today, like I don't play Rising Miasma in my main deck very often. Okay, sure. But, I just don't have this thing where like I feel the urge to interrupt Luis and be like, are you crazy? You don't play that. Or, Sky Spawner's not the best common. What are you even talking? Like, we tend to be on the same page, and I'm not going to fake it just for the sake of like some, tension on the show. So it's it's just interesting on that. What's that?
I like my note on this one better.
Yeah, your note is pretty good on this one. So I was trying to get the serious stuff out of the way, but your goal is be less great at limited with a sub goal of rudely cut Marshall off if he starts rambling. And you even had an extra note that says, yes, it has to be rudely.
Look, I just respond to feedback. If people give me feedback, I have to follow it.
Oh, that's not how that works at all. There, I disagreed with you. Another takeaway, sunset shows are a big hit. I kind of screwed up the scheduling for Origins, and it ended up being that we didn't end up doing a proper sunset show for Origins, and people clearly missed it. So that was a mistake that I will not be repeating. It was interesting though to look back because I kind of thought, oh, the sunset shows are fun. People seem to like them, but they really missed it. Like they were like, wait a minute, when are we getting our sunset show? This is nonsense. And I'm like, oh, you were serious about that? And so now I'm really, trying to make sure that we get those scheduled out, ahead of time because, people really like them. By the way, love the goal on that one.
So it says sunset shows are a big hit. Don't miss them. Goal. Don't miss them.
Don't miss them. So that shouldn't be a super hard goal to hit, but we'll do that for sure.
Number
go ahead. What's the
6
next one?
Set re-reviews are popular. These are when we did this starting with actually just this set, Battle for Zendikar, and it kind of prompted because I did this for my written set reviews.
Yeah.
Again, for the first time with Battle for Zendikar, which was go back and take a look at the things that have changed a lot since our first look at the set. It's like, why do a set review if you're not going to go recheck your work?
Yeah, and it's weird because we do cover this stuff, right? Like as the set goes, we will often say that. It will say like, oh, we were off on that, or this didn't seem to be the case, but it is, right?
Yeah, it was definitely something we would naturally, like organically do. It would come up.
Yeah, but we just gave it some structure here,
Right. And so the goal is to make sure to identify cards with big shifts and don't retry to cover ground. Like this is the episode I think we're most likely to skip. Like this is not, I'm not penciling in a set review every single set because there's going to be some sets that are just straightforward enough. Like I don't think we would have done one for Origins even if we were doing this.
No, I think we could have covered that in a 10-minute spiel about this is what we know now and how it changes the things,
I think for Battle for Zendikar it was really valuable because there's a lot of cards that change drastically.
Mm-hmm.
But not every set's going to be like that. So we're going to do these when it's appropriate. And when it's appropriate, it's just going to be when there's a lot of interesting stuff going on that was not immediately obvious, or at least not to us.
Yeah. So I like that. And I really like labeling them and giving them a thing. And I kind of liked where, in editing, I started to pick up some of the stuff that we had said before. And I think there's something there, that resonates, with people getting a chance to really, like, I think accountability is huge. Right. And I think we do a pretty good job of staying accountable to what we say and to not, we don't go in the set review and just pontificate about, these broad proclamations. I think we're pretty measured and we hedge and, we're not the type of people really to get in and overhype something or push something really hard in one direction. And I think that helps with our accountability. But, I listen to other podcasts and other things. And, when people make big predictions or say things, I always want to be like, I want to hear in a month if you were right. And I want you to bring it up and listen to the exact words that you said and then say, this is where I was wrong, or this is where I was right, or this is what I think now. And this gives us a way to do that. And even if we're not, standing on top of a, soapbox, just screaming at, that something's a certain way, I think it is still useful for us to do this because to become the best possible card evaluator is to do that. And, it's never our goals in the set review to be perfect. We always talk about how there's going to be things that are going to change, and we're going to end up figuring it out as we go. And if
Marshall,
for people
stop talking.
was that you rudely interrupting me?
Was it rude enough?
Not quite. You could be a little meaner. You laughed right after.
Yeah,
we'll work on it.
I cannot abide rudeness, to quote Hannibal Lecter.
Great. That makes me feel better. But yeah, I think that, we set the tone pretty well in the set review for what we're trying to do. But I don't think that means that we can't be accountable for what we say and to, explain further about what we've learned.
Well, it's also really good to know why unnatural aggression ends up being bad.
Really good to know.
And that sort of thing, just because that gives us clues for the next time. And the funny thing is, you could print unnatural aggression, the exact same card in another set, and have it be a very good card.
That's totally true.
So it's not just like this card is now bad. It's like, why is this card bad in this particular instance? So
yeah, and that's fascinating to me because I learned a lot from that, right? Like, and the answer is it's in a color that's not good, and I've learned that 3 mana, even at instant speed, for a fight card isn't good enough because it doesn't pump my guy. And it's that's really interesting.
The stats of the creatures in the format also don't line up. There's too many X3s in green that don't end up living through what you want to kill.
Exactly. And I think that those little case studies really inform yourself going forward, because I'll tell you what, you learn something like that, and the next fight card we see, I'm looking at it differently than I did on natural aggression. I'm learning from it. So anyway, yes, set re-reviews. We are going to be doing those when they seem applicable. Number 7, interviews are great. Do more of them. The goal, of course, is to do more interviews. You say that that's easy, though I would disagree.
I think it is easy because, we're both lucky enough to be in a position where we can grab a lot of people who
that is true.
Are really good to talk to. So
yes,
I think that we're going to, one of the things I would like to do is just get a list of people we think should be on the show and get them on the show.
I actually have one.
All right. Well,
I can share it with you.
Perfect. I mean, that is the sort of thing that we want to do. And we've had some really good interviews this year, and I think we could do more.
I agree.
We're not going to turn into a show that has a guest on every other week.
No.
But I think we could do, how many interviews did we actually do this year? Something like 4?
Probably 4.
We could easily do 2 times that is what I was going to say. So.
Yeah, I think so too. We could do 8 to 10 easy. And I agree, especially because it complements one of the ones that we said earlier, Luis, which was that they think we should disagree more. As it turns out, you and I are similar enough in our approach to the game and approach to limited that we just naturally don't disagree a lot. But getting a fresh take is really valuable in that setting, because eventually people get a good feel for how we're going to approach things, right? And I do feel like that's the correct way to do it, which is why I tell the listeners to do it. But man, when you get somebody in that approaches it differently, that does not mean that they are wrong, right? Like there is room in Magic to approach things differently. It doesn't mean that we're wrong either. No, there's room in Magic to approach the game from different angles and have success at doing that. And that's really cool to get a chance to listen to somebody else's.
I will admit, though, there are less different angles than people think. People do tend to go deep on there's a lot of viable plays there, and it's like, well, there's probably less viable plays than you think. You should hold people accountable, but
totally,
I do love getting different viewpoints.
Yeah, and I think it's really useful for the listeners. So number 8 was that some people liked the pre-Pro Tour discussion. I thought that this stuff, I found it super fascinating, but then again, I'm at the Pro Tour watching this. It's relevant to my job. Like, this is, kind of one of my favorite things about what I do is I get to get in these discussions about the Pro Tour stuff because of the time crunch. But we did get some feedback in there that people like that, who were going to watch it too. Like, they just felt like it enhanced their viewing experience and gave them, I've said this before about having you on the show, Luis, as you're the first full-time Magic Pro that I've had. And you're doing a lot of stuff right now, but you know what I mean? And so I felt like leveraging that for the podcast was really cool. Like getting a chance to get an insider look at how Team Channel Fireball's tested and, what your approaches are. We've never had that. We've had, people that have been on the Pro Tour, but no, serious, regular, full-time players. And so I feel like leveraging that is really good. Like that's just an angle we've never been able to bring to the listeners on the show, and having you on means that we can. So I think that's a good thing, and we should continue to do it.
So there's a couple interesting things going on here. One is that one of the things I was worried about coming onto the show that I really am trying to not do is I don't want to lean in too hard on the Pro Tour angle, because there is some of that that's very useful, and I think that like these shows are an example of something where it's really good. But this isn't a podcast about the Pro Tour, and I definitely don't want it to become one. And I didn't want to be like, well, this is my Pro Tour team, and we know everything that's going on. It's more like, if you want, what I can bring you, one of the things I can bring to the show is the first week that the set is out, or, I guess counting the pre-release 2 weeks, I can give you what a team of professional Magic players think about the format, which
it's huge.
Even if you don't believe it, is still good to listen to. And that has nothing to do with us saying that the Pro Tour is what matters. And you don't have to care about the Pro Tour at all, but if your goal is to get better at Limited, I think you would be insane not to listen to at least what these people think about the Pro Tour, or think about the format, because their incentives to get the format right are very, very high. They're spending a lot of their time on it, and they're, to some degree, very good at Magic. So yes. I think that these episodes are one of the things that I think is leveraging my background in a good way. There are ways to overemphasize it, which I don't like, and I'm, again, been very diligent about not doing that. But this is one of the ways where I think it's just upside. So
I agree.
I don't have plans to cease doing this before, for every Pro Tour, basically go up sometime Friday morning or so, or late Thursday night, every time the Pro Tour rolls around.
Right. I agree. And I think that not only the early insider stuff, but also the process too. I think that, how does a real professional testing team go about breaking down a limited format? And that's just huge. So
professional might be a stretch. No. Professional in some aspects.
Yes, I'll give you that. After knowing the team, yes.
So number
9. Oh. LSV is now viewed as okay. And this is more of a joke that I put in just because, when you first came on, people were a little skeptical, right? They were like, well, who's the new guy? And, is he going to be okay? And I think maybe they were a little concerned that like you would do what you were just talking about. Like, oh, let's talk about my Pro Tour testing team. And people are like, yeah, okay. I'm aware of the Pro Tour, but it's not really, my thing. I'm more into just drafting on Magic Online or at my local shop. And, I did get this sort of funny undertone of people saying like, okay, fine, Luis is good. And, obviously I knew you were going to be good, when you come on, or I wouldn't have brought you on, but I did think it was kind of funny that people are like, all right, you've won them over. So good job. What's your goal for that?
My goal is prove the people who think I'm okay wrong.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say in which direction.
One way or the other. What about 10?
10 is talk about what we're looking for in a given draft archetype specifically. So what this means is we talk about blue-white flyers or blue-black devoid, or black-green elves and origins, and we tend to talk about the things you're looking for in these decks, the cards that matter, but we don't break it down really specifically. And one of the ideas I had for this was maybe break the decks down a little bit more like systematically, where we're like, this deck wants 4 cards that process, 5 cards that ingest, that sort of thing. I mean, you can't lay it out. You can't exactly say like blue-white flyers wants 3 bounce spells, 3 flyers that cost 3, 2 that cost 4, 1 that costs 5. Like that's not really how you can end up drafting, but we can give more of a formal framework than we have been. So we can try experimenting with that and just seeing how it goes.
Yeah. So the thing that comes to my mind with that is I don't think about it in those terms about like, I can look at a bunch of deck lists that I've drafted and say which ones are better than others and what I'd like, but it's like that just doesn't, like, what you want doesn't really apply in a big way to what you end up getting in the draft. But it does, I guess, guide some things. And then the other thing is that I'm just concerned about like basically listing off decks, right? Being like, okay, Luis, here's a blue-white flyers deck I had this week that I thought was really good. And then just go, I've got 2 fortified ramparts and, and just start going down this list. I find those bigger picture visuals can just be pretty tough for people to process in an audio setting. I know it is for me. But I think we can do a good job of communicating it out reasonably. And also, I think if the difference is us not really talking about that and then talking about it in some way, it's probably an improvement anyway.
Agreed. And I don't want to, one of the things I'm wary about when it comes to laying things out too specifically is people kind of feel like they're locked into that. Like, I don't want people to think this is too rigid. People just take you very literally, and I don't want limited has a lot of flex to it, and you need to adapt to changing circumstances. I don't want to end up in a situation where someone's like, well, they said it only wants 4 cards that cost 5s, but so I guess I can't take this, great blue flyer. So and that's just not how you want to approach it.
Don't want that to happen. Yeah. Yeah. So we'll have to work on that, but I think that we can certainly give at least hints to what we think the decks are.
So
what about 11? Yeah.
So this is a big one. People want primers on the sets for the year of modern drafts on Magic Online. So what this is recently announced that over the next year, Magic Online is going to have throwback drafts in order of the sets being legal and modern. So
starting with what, 8th edition or
starting
whatever?
with 8th edition. So we're going to see a ton of old formats, and this is now at a much higher cadence than there used to be. It used to be there was a throwback draft like for 1 week of every month or something along those lines, or maybe not even
less so, yeah.
Now it's literally just going to be week to week to week. Every single week there's going to be one on, which means we're going to cycle through a ton of old formats at a fast clip, and a lot of these are formats listeners haven't played or have not played for a long time. And so there's a couple goals here. One is that I do think we should talk about them because...
Do you? I think that's a big question.
Well...
if we talk about something on the show every single week that doesn't apply to people that don't play Magic Online, that's a pretty big commitment to, potentially talk about something that doesn't really affect part of our audience.
Well, I'm not saying every single week because some of the formats...
You don't want to go deep on 8th edition draft?
Right. 8th edition was an example like... First of all, I don't even remember anything about 8th edition.
I've never drafted it.
So we wouldn't even be useful. But second of all, there's too many formats. Like you said, this isn't a show about Magic Online either. This is a show about Limited.
Yeah.
And so I think our goal, and we still have to kind of brainstorm and maybe iterate on this a little bit more, our goal is to try to provide short, and we're talking actually short, like less than 10-minute recaps of the formats we deem appropriate. So that's not every single format, but I do think we can give someone, I bet in 10 minutes I could give a guide about drafting triple Mirrodin, like original Mirrodin. That would be very useful to people who've never drafted it, and maybe give people the push they need to try it when they wouldn't have otherwise. And I think that's good.
I think that is good too. If you can do it, the keeping it to under 10 minutes seems like a challenge.
Well, challenge accepted. As long as
I'm not saying you can't. I just mean, these formats are deep, and it's tempting to, really try to cover a lot of ground. How useful do you think the 10-minute primer would be?
I think for some formats it'll be great, and for the ones where I don't think it'll be useful, maybe we don't do that format.
Okay.
But
no, I think you can do it too. That seems really cool.
Plenty of formats that you can get down to, and plus I can start talking really fast. So.
Well, and there's a lot of them where I would pretty much be out of your way, because I started drafting in Zendikar, and I have almost nothing to say about anything before that.
Well, I've never stopped you before, but
look, it's a podcast. I'm supposed to talk.
So that's our goal for that is find a way to give good information on these modern drafts, but certainly not dominate the time, and do it in a way that's efficient for people who don't play Magic Online. Also, one of the suggestions we saw was maybe have these at the beginning or end of the podcast so people who don't want them can skip them fairly easily. So
yeah, I did think about what I just said though, and I will say that it's just because you don't play on Magic Online doesn't mean that a primer, even a really quick primer for an old set, is completely useless. It
doesn't have to be boring either.
Yeah.
Right. Number 12.
Well, I didn't say that. Number 12. Sign-offs were good and valuable, but some people desired more wackiness. I saw these on there. I tend to just ignore. I personally feel like each co-host can do whatever they want with the sign-offs, including not do them. They're optional. I think it's really cool that you've decided to pick up the torch and keep doing them. But I've super enjoyed your style of sign-off that's part informative, part story time, part funny. John and Brian were pretty similar with theirs, where they were a lot more theatrical with it, where you're less so. But I think that the mark you've left on the sign-offs has been really fun and really cool, and I wouldn't have you change them myself to something goofier.
Well, the goal is this one's on you, Marshall.
You've got my answer.
The other goal is more Ben Stark stories, since
yes,
he's one of the most ridiculous humans I've ever.
I will take any Ben Stark stories at any point. Yeah.
Well, yeah. Let's just say we ran a Twitter account that was well, quote, stuff Ben S says. That's not the exact.
Close to that, yeah.
And he did not want us posting everything he said until after the Hall of Fame voting. So, like one of them, for example, just a very quick snippet is, and these are all just straight up Ben S quotes. It's all we would do. We would not embellish them. Is I bought a 5-hour energy and sleeping pills, and I don't know which one to take first. This was the night before a Grand Prix top 8.
Oh God, he's a unique. We'll get him on the show, by the way.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
So number 13, I feel like we kind of covered before, which is acronyms and names for things are useful, like Cavs Noober, but be sure to define them if we mention them. Our goal is mention these if we talk about them. Don't drown listeners in alphabet soup, but when we use LR trademark concepts, be clear what they mean, which I think is a good goal.
Yeah, and I think we're pretty close to that one too. 14 is a really interesting one, I think, which is level ups are great, do more, right? And we get that feedback all the time that I think many of our listeners' favorite episodes are the level up episodes. Level up ones, of course, are the ones that tend to be more applicable to Magic in general or limited in general rather than super specific to like what's going on in Battle for Zendikar, which is, of course, important too. And incidentally, they happen to be both Luis and my favorite shows to do too. The hard part is that the show's been around for a long time, and we've hit a large portion of what we would want to hit. And we aren't afraid to repeat when necessary, but you don't want to do it often. I don't want to, 6 months later run the exact same show back. So, it's a finite thing, right? We can't just do, we couldn't just say, let's just do level up shows only from now on. Let's ignore when the sets come out and we're only going to do level. That just wouldn't be possible. We'll simply run out of things to talk about.
I think people would want us to talk about the sets too.
Well, yeah, which is what we do. but the thing is, I think that we did a good job in that last stretch, but they're hard, right? Level up shows require a lot of work. We want to get them right. We don't want to tell you some big sweeping thing and then realize the next morning, oh my God, we totally forgot to talk about blank, and just be like, well, that sucks. So, Luis and I put extra time to make sure that the show notes are fleshed out how we want them and we don't miss stuff. So, and that adds to it. And plus, they're just more difficult. It's like writing a really in-depth article or whatever. Well, and so they can be really tough.
Basically, level up shows, like you said, are the best. They're a ton of fun. They're overall I find the most satisfying part of the show. They're just really hard to get high quality, and we don't want to compromise on that. So we're going to do as many as we think we can. It's just we're not going to be it's not going to be all level up shows nor
no. You know what I was thinking though, Luis, was I think that the interview shows in many ways can lead to level up moments for people.
That's actually perfect.
Yeah.
Because that kind of takes the burden off us in that we don't have to come up with a topic we haven't covered. We just have to talk to someone about their approach, and that will definitely lead to level up moments in a way that we, of course, wouldn't be able to predict because we don't know everything these people are going to say.
And when we're setting up a guest, what I'll often do, and the best way to get on the show is I'll ask them something along the lines of like, what's one thing that you have to say
what's
about Limited? Yeah, like give me something, like just, what do you want to come on and talk about, right? Not, I mean, I don't mind having an interesting and good player come on and I can just come up with questions and ask them. But the people that really shine on the show, like Owen did, are people that have something to say. There's something in them, right? That they're just like, why do people think that Limited is all about this when it's really about this? And that's really a spark moment and a thing that we can capture on the show that's great. And, when people ask to come on the show and they say, hey, I'd be available. And it's something who I'm like, yeah, I'd love to have you on the show. The first thing I say is, great. I'll put you on my list and we'll talk again. But what I want from you is come with something. It doesn't have to be a fully fleshed out topic, but just something that I can, give to the listeners so that they have like a takeaway. And we're not just talking about like how good you are at Magic or that you won so many tournaments or whatever. Like I want to get something out of it,
I mean, Tim Willoughby was kind of on the show just because he's an awesome dude. And then that show ended up great. It was just one of my favorite shows of the year. Mm-hmm. That's the exception rather than the rule. Most people we would want, a specific reason to have them on the show besides them just being generally awesome. So, I was super pleased how Tim's show came out, and I'm sure we're going to have him on the show again because of how
the
strong.
Willow Beatdown will be back, yes.
Well, it was just such a strong show, but that I would not have guessed that every single person who's just like generally good is just going to lead to a show like that. So
yeah. And part of that's on us, to ask
certainly
good questions and keep the conversation lively.
Well, part of the reason we should have guests on is because we think they have something great to offer, and we
totally
can try to set up content or topics which can let them unlock that.
Yeah, totally. So I think that when it comes to the level ups, we'll be able to have even more of those going into next year as we have more guests on. So I think that's cool. One more, Luis.
Card text. When you're talking about cards from old sets, especially as it comes to these flashback drafts, say what the cards do. We tended to hit this really hard at the beginning of the format and a little less hard at the end. I'm not convinced that we need to say, what Eldrazi Skyspawner does in week 9 of the format, but we certainly should in weeks like 1 through 6. Mm-hmm. And definitely when we're talking about like flashback drafts of like Champions of Kamigawa, we should definitely talk about all the cards. Yep.
And I think we do a pretty decent job of it. Yeah. But the thing is that it really stands out when we don't. Right. Because you lose a listener of they're like, I just don't know what you're talking about now. And that is a big hit. Like,
definitely.
We just have to be careful when we decide to skim over this. Because I agree. Like, I think that it's net positive for our listeners, for example, for the Crack-A-Pack today, to, again, not read Cloud Manta. Right. Like, I think it is net positive to save that time and to just sort of move through the pack rather than sort of drowning it in, all these extra words. But like you said, on any other stuff, I think it's important and earlier in the format too. All right, well, that's it. Those were the takeaways that we had from the feedback. Thanks so much for everybody on the subreddit who contributed to that post that Luis made. He said it at the beginning, but I'll echo it. We're always looking to improve the show, and getting feedback directly from our awesome listeners is the best way to do it. So thumbs up, and thank you for that. And, we're on Twitter. If you guys have any feedback that you'd like to give, just hit us up. You can just hit us up on there. That's the easiest way, because I think that one of the things too, Luis, about feedback is that it is so much more easy to take when it's small.
Yeah.
If it's a 5-paragraph feedback, it might be really good stuff, but it's just so like when we just get a lot of it, and it's just so hard to single out what the point of that whole thing is and what you're really asking for. And if somebody can do it in a few sentences or over the course of like a tweet or two, it really does make it more digestible for us. And we certainly listen. So thanks. All right. Well, that's going to do it for the show this week. If you want to find us on social media, I just mentioned Twitter. I'm Marshall_LR and Luis is LSV. So super easy. If you do have something a little longer than Twitter, but you can still keep it manageable, I'll trust you on this one. LR@lrcast.com is where you can find us. You can find everything related to the show at lrcast.com, including links to the streams that we talked about. We have a Facebook page. We have a YouTube channel. Videos, articles that I write, all that kind of stuff. It's all on the front page of lrcast.com, along with the blog and the episodes and all that kind of stuff too. So, that's going to do it for this week. Thanks a lot for hanging out. We, again, appreciate the feedback that you gave, and we appreciate you taking the time to hang out with Luis and I. We always look forward to our time with you every week, and we'll see you next time.
So, it's the end of the year. We did our year in review. So it's also, that of course means it's time for the first annual LRcast Awards.
Oh, awards.
So, yep.
Did I win an award? I like awards.
We'll find out. These are, we're going to go with the Limmies, as in the limited resources.
The Limmies?
We might iterate on that, but this is the first annual LRcast Awards for this year. So let's kick things off with the worst grade of the year. That honor belongs to Ugin the Spirit Dragon, which we gave a D.
Yes.
Ugin the Spirit Dragon was the literal best card in the set.
We drop kicked that one pretty bad.
Okay, maybe second best Citadel Siege. Honorable mention, also from Favorite Forged, we gave Mastery of the Unseen a C+. Also one of the top 5 cards in the set.
That was an A, yes.
So the Limmy for that one goes to Ugin the Spirit Dragon. The best grade, it goes to Dampening Pulse from Battle for Zendikar, which I gave a B-, and Marshall gave a C+. That was the best grade because it was still underrated, even though that was what was going to be predicted. It turns out it's not like an amazing card. It's not the best card in the world, but it is a very solid card, and people tended to underrate it. So
I would give it a B now for what it's worth.
Right, and I think that makes it one of the better grades, and in fact, the best grade.
Congratulations, Dampening Pulse.
The next category is Most Valuable Contributor, Guests. The Limmy for that one has to go to Owen Turtwald from episode 311, Owen the Enchanter. Owen really did set the bar for what it means to be a guest. And I think these awards were compiled through, user feedback. And the user feedback on that episode was the best of, I think, any episode we got this year. So
it was overwhelming.
So that of course made it Owen in a landslide.
Also, and I've done all the interviews for every guest we've ever had on the show, and Owen was easily one of the best, if not. He was fantastic.
That's why he earned the Lemmy.
And somebody also in the comments said that it made him seem more human.
Well,
I was like, all right,
you get an award for that too.
Yeah, Lemmy deserved.
The Lemmy for most valuable contributor in the category of sign-offs was Shahar Shenhar. He has yet to appear on the show, but he is integral to our sign-off strategy this year.
he really was a big. Congratulations, Shahar, on your Lemmy.
The tallest co-host category, the Lemmy goes to Marshall Sutcliffe.
I won!
The honorable mention, LSV.
Congrats to both of us.
Well, we had to win something. The Lemmy for most valuable episode goes to LR286, Top 10 Traps Unlimited. This was, again, voted on via user feedback, and this was consistently brought up as one that had a lot of good information in a way that people could easily digest and stick with. So we're going to go with episode 286, the Top 10 Traps Unlimited. Love Ball Trap, of course, being one of them.
I think it was number 10, right?
The Lemmy for best card name, of course, goes to Marsh Hulk. That wasn't particularly close.
Yeah, that's true.
The Lemmy for best new mascot. Harold barely wins this one, since he was the only new mascot introduced this year.
He barely wins.
The Lemmy for Sweetest Archetype Award, it goes to Blue-Black Fairy Miscreants in Origins. This is the Blue-Black deck that drafted Fairy Miscreant and Bonded Fetch and all these just I always call it Bonded Construct and all these just one-mana flyers and terrible cards. That was a very fun deck to draft, even though it did not come together all that often.
All right, congratulations to Fairy Miscreant for winning something. We certainly didn't win any games.
The honorable mention goes to Blue-Black Exploit and Dragon's Fate Reforged, because that just was a sweet deck to draft.
That was sweet, yeah.
The Lemmy for the worst archetype goes to Green-Blue Midrange in Battle for Zendikar. This was a deck that had a couple random devoid processor cards, oddly enough, a couple random green-blue mid-range cards like bounce spells, and a bunch of terrible creatures. This deck never won.
So Void Attendant picks up his Lemmy and shimmies off the stage.
It does. The honorable mention goes to Green-White Allies, Green-Red Landfall, and Green-Black Sacrifice, all from Battle for Zendikar.
Wow, Green really swept up the worst category on Lemmies.
It certainly did. The Lemmy for Sweetest Build-Around goes to Goblin Slide. It wins in a Goblin Slide. It's... The honorable mention goes to Demonic Pact from Origins, which was always good times. And whether you killed yourself or your opponent, it was still pretty sweet.
Exciting either way.
The most disappointing Build-Around award goes to Girapur Aethergrid. This card looked awesome, was terrible. The Lemmy for the dishonorable mentions goes to every other Origins Build-Around.
Yep.
The best mana award goes to Aben Surveyor. The honor, and that was not best man award; it was best man award. The honorable mention goes to Void Mage Separatist, and the dishonorable mention goes to Mercstrider. This looks like a man war; it is not a man war. It is a pretender. So,
what about Clutch? Does Clutch get on the Lemmy list here? Or is it not an actual man?
No, it's not an actual creature, so it didn't quite get there.
It wasn't there. All right, fair enough.
The most controversial addition to the show. That goes to...
Oh, God.
Ooh, a Fathom Feeder.
Boo.
That was easily the most controversial.
Why do you do this?
The honorable mention, though, is interesting. The honorable mention goes to...
Wow. In a shocking twist, you've opened another pack.
A foil Endless One and a Noyandar Royal Shaper. There we go. That concludes our first annual Limited Resources Awards for 2015.
Yay!
Congratulations to everyone who won a Lemmy, except for, of course, Green Blue Midrange. Did not win an award you want to win.